Following up from the last video, I got asked a question, and it came from Kevin. This question is, so what would be the advantage of using free weights? Is there any benefit, time, and place for them? It seems to be that machines are superior when it comes to bodybuilding aesthetics. And this may be true, okay? But I need more context on the type of machine that you're using. But before I get into the actual machines themselves, let me start with this. A lot of people believe that functional training, in order to functionally train, you must use free weights, you must use dumbbells so that you challenge your stabilizer muscles, okay? It's commonly purported that in order to challenge your stabilizer muscles, you must use free weights so that you are, creating this joint stabilization through the muscles. Now, this couldn't be further from the truth. All muscles are responsible for stabilization, and all muscles are responsible for movement. Both stabilization and movement are nothing more than muscular contraction. So if we take everything back to the deepest level, everything is a muscular contraction, whether you are trying to stabilize or whether you're trying to move a joint. What determines whether you are stabilizing or whether you are moving a joint, because that is all you're doing on a fundamental level. What determines that is the direction the resistance is being loaded. That will determine what the responsibility of that muscle is within that given circumstance and context, because it will change depending on how the resistance or the direction of the resistance is being loaded. So it's commonly purported that in order to challenge your stabilizers or to be more functional, you need to use dumbbells and not machines. Now, as I said, that couldn't be further from the truth. Anything that elicits any sort of measurable adaptation toward your goal is beneficial. So let's take that a step further. Can you get stronger? Can you get better at contracting your muscles on a machine? Absolutely. You don't need free weights for that. So what are some of the other benefits of using a machine? Well, you have a consistent, predictable path of motion when you're using a machine. So if every rep you're doing looks consistent from the last one and the subsequent ones look the same as the current one, well, then we have a degree of consistency there. We have a degree of stability, of restraint, of support. We're able to completely isolate that muscle and that joint that we intend on working. So those are some of the benefits of using a machine. So logically, then you'd say, well, obviously it's a no-brainer. Machines are always better. Again, this requires more context, because the problem with many machines is that they are not designed properly and effectively, depending on the brand, and even taking it a step further, depending on the line of said brand. So we have Cybex, we have Nautilus, we have all these different machines in here, these different brands, and a lot of these machines actually, even the best ones, they're not that great because there's a high degree of individualization requirements in order for that machine to function properly for whatever individual is using it. And so some people may get on one machine and they're going to find it to be quite effective, and then another person may get on with longer extremities or shorter extremities or heavier or lighter body weights. That all is going to influence whether that machine is good or bad. And another thing is, like, a lot of these machines, even if the cam, the thing I spoke about on it, is designed correctly, well, there are many other variables that you got to take into consideration to determine whether the machine is good or bad, such as the handle placements. The problem with a lot of these machines that we use is that they determine where the handles are, these engineers, and then we sit down on these machines and we just grab the handles, even if they're not in the optimal place for us relative to the joint that we're working. So there are many downsides to using a machine as well. And the reason I bring this to your attention, the reason I'm even discussing this, is because in order for me to make an informed decision whether something is good or whether something is bad, I have to be able to argue, I have to be able to debate both points of view or all perspectives and take all of them into consideration. Because if I just blindly believe that machines are good, well then now I'm just brainwashing myself in this echo chamber and looking for confirmation bias. I'm just looking for things to support my ideas. But in I'm not married to any one method or another. What I'm really concerned with is figuring out the best way of doing things. And for me to figure out the best way of doing things, I need to consider all possible variables and perspectives, even the ones that challenge one another, right? Like, you should be able to have conflicting opinions about something. For example, you should be able to say, I don't like the Liberal government, but I like Mark Carney, or I don't like conservatives, but I like Trump, or I'm a conservative, but I don't like Trump. And this applies to everything in life. What I find that people do is they go off on one end or another, and they identify so much with one belief or one ideology or one way of thinking, which is probably the worst thing you can do, the most destructive and detrimental, because you completely ignore all of the good on the other side. So when would I use a dumbbell? Going back to this point. Well, I'll give you an example. If I'm doing a bicep curl, if I'm doing a concentration curl, the drop off, meaning the change in resistance, because gravity is the greatest influence in this, the primary influence that we can't change, just so you know. Gravity is the primary influence in this, which dictates how the change in resistance occurs through this excursion, through this path of motion, through this range of motion. So it just so happens to be that as I'm doing a concentration curl, the drop-off of resistance is quite congruent with the change in length and change in strength relative to that change in length. That's a really good thing. If I go over to a preacher curl machine, just any random brand, and I get on it and I'm using it, well, that cam, that thing that rotates on the side of the machine that influences the resistance, it is 50% of the resistance actually, and the other 50% is the weight on the weight stack. But the other 50%, and the more important 50%, is that cam, because that cam is dictating the variability in the resistance through all ranges of motion. If that thing is not set up correctly, and in most cases, most machines are not, because I study them, I choose them, I source them, I curate this gym accordingly to that. And if that cam is not set up correctly, in this specific context, the concentration curl with a dumbbell is far more effective than using a machine. So you need a lot of context and a lot of understanding to really make an informed decision. To assume that machines are just far superior than free weights, well, it depends on the context of it. It depends on what is the exercise, what does that machine look like, what is the engineering of that machine, does that machine offer me the thing that I want in order for me to reach failure much quicker? Or am I gonna have to do a lot more volume, a lot more sets, a lot more repetitions in order to reach that point, because I simply cannot get to that point of fatigue because the exercise is not allowing me to, because there's too much of a disparity or too much of a discrepancy between the lengthened position and the shortened position, or the different positions, and then the resistance that follows that. So I need a lot more context. It's not always more advantageous for you to use a machine, but there are many other benefits to using a machine. Now, what I will say is when it comes back to this functional training stuff, that couldn't be further from the truth to say that free weights, because they're free, and we do this all the time. We associate names with things. So we think free weight, therefore, we're challenging more of our stabilizers because we have to be more stable. Again, that couldn't be further from the truth, because, if I'm challenging my body in one direction with resistance, well, then I have to come up with the ability to stabilize myself. I have to come up with the ability to contract muscle so that I don't fall over, so that I can stop that external resistance. And then that is going to determine whether I am stabilizing the joint, or I'm moving the joint, or I am resisting motion at the joint, because that's a whole other thing. And, just to make blanket statements like that are quite detrimental and quite destructive, and misleading to a lot of people, because they have no idea what exercise they should be doing, whether free weights are better or not better. And just as a blanket statement, I would say that machines are better overall if the machine is designed correctly for the context of building muscle. Okay? Does it mean that I can't build muscle with body weight stuff? Of course I can. Does it mean I can't build muscle with free weights? Of course I can. But the problem with these things is that I'm not getting the appropriate dose. Okay? And it's all about appropriate dose. Now, let's take this let's finish with this, conclude with this. The appropriate dose is this. When I did my knee surgery, I've done knee surgery twice, and the first time I went through physiotherapy and I used their recommended prescription. Now, the problem with this was they wanted me to do single leg squats at a certain point in time. Now, how do you think that looks to assume that at a certain benchmark at 8 weeks or 10 weeks post-surgery that everybody should be able to do a single leg squat, or whatever the number was? I don't recall, I'm just making up figures here. But imagine that I am loading my body on one leg. Well, the first question to ask is, how much do you weigh? And is the weight of your body the appropriate dose for your knee's strength, for the strength of your knee and all the tissue surrounding? In most cases, I can guarantee you it's not going to be the appropriate amount. It's not going to be the effective dose. So you're just using random, arbitrary weights at different stages. At different stages in your rehab. And the same is true with body weight exercise in the gym. I'm not saying push-ups are bad or body weight squats are bad. The point is, if I'm doing one and you're doing one, the weight of my body is different than yours, and that's predetermining how much I'm going to load that joint with. Would we do that with anything else? Would you just get on a machine randomly and select any weight at random? Would you select any weight at random and make the blanket assumption or presupposition that that weight is the appropriate weight for you given your current status? More than likely not. So given that context, I would say that machines are more effective and more advantageous. Again, you need more context in order to make an informed decision. And that's what my goal is with these videos and with Elite Coaching System, is that I'm able to provide more value in terms of helping you make more informed decisions. Because the most important thing that you're going to do is use your brain. That's the most important muscle that you're ever going to use. And nobody wants to do that. They want to go and ask somebody, tell me what I should be doing, and I don't want to think. But the beauty of this is you have one body. Okay? And because you have one body, you only need to learn your individual mechanics once because it only applies to you. And then you can use that as a blanket for everything else and figure out which exercises are most effective for you or not effective for you. Comment below, let me know any other questions you have.